I suppose it means being inspired, being in a position, putting yourself in a position to be inspired, and then taking that inspiration and turning it into something tangible, perhaps a poem, perhaps a piece of art, perhaps perhaps an insightful conversation. But it's about finding something in the mundane generally that inspires you to create something.
Okay. And do you agree with this notion that creativity needs to have some value for it to be called creative?
Good question. Yes, but I think even if it only has value for you, yourself, that is enough. They say that you only need to change the world one person at a time. So if that one person is yourself, that's fine, because you become a role model. So yeah, I think the value doesn't have to be to many people. It can be to one.
Okay, so the value can start at the individual level, and then, you know,
yes, I mean, today I wrote, my father is passing away, and I wrote a poem about it, and every time I've read that poem, it has made me cry. Now, to me, that is productive.
Yes, because it's helping you to deal with the situation, to, I don't know, to, yeah, it's a very challenging time, isn't it? And
yes, it's expressing myself, and but also it feels like I am, rather than just keeping the thoughts that I have in my head, I've put them down on paper. So my thoughts have been made manifest, and that to me is very powerful, very healing, very therapeutic, very useful. But it means that I can do something with my pain and make it into something that feels like it's a positive.
I understand, and I advocate the work of Julia Cameron, for example, the author of The Artist's Way. She recommends writing a diary, you know, at least 3 or 4 pages every day, like journaling. And I think there is research to show that people who write journals on a regular basis, they tend to, it seems to be linked with success in their careers in some way, that because it enables us to process information and to make sense of the world through this process of writing, which might only be of value to us at the individual level. And then we have other authors whose diaries have become of value at the societal level. So what is it, in your view as a publisher, if you saw a diary, how would you know whether that diary is only of value to the person who wrote it, or whether it may have value on a more general societal level?
Well, I think that if you write a diary and you are still in the pain, you are still grieving, you are still feeling blame, you are still feeling perhaps too much guilt, while there's still too much emotion wrapped up in what it is you're writing about, I don't think then that the diary is of value to other people. I think it is only of value to other people when you've stopped sobbing or stopped stamping your feet, and you can be objective about the situation you're writing about. And only then, when you are writing because you want to support and inspire others, not because you want to vent or get your own back on the page, when you're writing because of other people. So I think it's quite easy for diary writing to feel quite narcissistic. That isn't what we want for anything to be useful. It cannot be self-indulgent or narcissistic. It has to be with the goal of supporting somebody else. So you have to step outside yourself and be away from the extreme emotion of the event in order to do that effectively.
I'm thinking of a classic diary that is known around the world, the Diary of Anne Frank. The Diary of Anne Frank is an example of, you know, someone's diary that was written, it was written by a teenager who was raw in their emotion. She wrote what she saw, what she perceived, and it's difficult to tell whether she intended for that book, for that her diary, to be read by people that she would never ever encounter.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how that, doesn't that book start with something like, I write so that it may live again, or something? I'm so sure she begins with a line, something like that. So she did have purpose. I don't think she was writing to be self-indulgent. I don't. I think she was just a truly talented and gifted human being. And I think she was processing what was going on. And I think she was at the time either phenomenally mature for her age or exquisitely naive and happened to get it right. I think she's pretty exceptional.
And I suppose that also illustrates the point that something that we write, there's a time and a place for it. That diary during her lifetime may have been, it would have caused a lot of trouble for her if that had been discovered during her lifetime.
Yes,
Whereas, 20 years later, 30 years later, 50 years later, it became a classic. I'm not sure how long it was after it was discovered, but
it was many years, wasn't it? It was many years. It was certainly 60s or 70s, I would say. Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
so even a diary can become a creative force for transformation, but it needs to find its place in the world in terms of time, in terms of location.
And in terms of audience. Sometimes you have to wait for the time to be right for the audience. I mean, there are certain subjects that people are very interested in now, like unplugging and switching off and mindfulness. Well, there will have been a time, yes, when it wouldn't have had the right audience, but now we're really ready, we're really hungry.
Yes, I've noticed that as well, that wherever I look, there seems to be, these words mindfulness, mindset, and 20 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Exactly. So it is about timing, it is about location, it's about it's about the audience being ready. Absolutely. It's about many different things, and something that may have really fallen flat at the time can then be really hot news later, and vice versa. There are certain books that have very short shelf lives. They say that you should write a book for, and they call it for the long tail, so it's something that sells slowly and steadily over time, rather than having a big blockbuster bestseller, which just does extremely well for a very short period and then disappears. But then it depends whether you're writing because you want to leave a legacy or not, or whether you want to make loads of money and write something really timely.
Yes, and also there's the case that some people are very gifted in terms of writing imaginative stories, novels, and others are more skilled in writing non-fiction. Do you think that it's possible for somebody to be equally creative in both of those domains, both the fiction and non-fiction, or do you think that some people are naturally going to be a lot more creative in one of those?
That's very interesting. You should ask that, because I would say that anybody can learn anything, but I do believe we all have a natural voice. I do believe we all have a style that will be more effective than other styles. I know for myself that non-fiction and poetry are my two natural voices, and although I have written a novel and I absolutely loved doing it, I don't think it was my natural milieu. I ended up paying probably more for editing and advice on that book than anything else, because I didn't feel it was my natural milieu. My natural milieu is helping people to write a how-to book, to write non-fiction that is teaching somebody else something that you know how to do, and also memoir, much more than fiction. Though I think I can learn the craft and I can do something pretty well. Natalie Goldberg, who wrote Writing Down the Bones, is absolutely fantastic at journaling. But I've read her novels, and frankly, I don't think they're that good, and she is a great writer.
That's interesting, isn't it? So what helped you to discover the fact that you are much better at writing how-to books? Was it as a result of the feedback that you received? Was it the evaluation, or what was it? Was it your own inner insights into what you enjoyed doing most, or what you were most passionate about, or was it the external feedback?
It was both, really. I mean, I was lucky. My first book was published when I was in my early 20s, and it was a cookbook. And I just was desperate to be published, and it was the first idea I had, and it got accepted immediately, and I was really lucky. So then I thought I'd keep writing cookbooks, but it didn't cross my mind that I actually couldn't cook, so that I wasn't going to get any more cookbooks. And then I had a lucky break, and I started to write word processing handbooks. This is in the 1980s, and I wrote 13 word processing handbooks. So by then, with the cookery book and with the word processing handbooks, I had learned how to write things that were very step by step. So I had learned about the importance of a system and a structure. So I then went on to stick with non-fiction, but I branched out into journalism, which I loved. I loved writing features. I much prefer writing features than I do writing news pieces, because there's more creativity in there. And then I was lucky enough to be offered to a column for a publication called Resident Abroad, which is no more. It was part of the Financial Times. And that taught me that writing columns is probably one of my favorite things in the world, and it's very similar to blogging. And the reason I like those is because I'm somebody who's inspired. I see ideas all over the place. I see metaphors and parallels. So for me, all I do is put my fingers on the keyboard and something comes to me and I write. So I think the fact that it takes almost no effort, all it takes is my ability to pay attention, that means that I can write those really easily with no research. So you could say I'm pretty lazy. So I think that's my natural voice, because it takes the least effort. They say that the thing you were born to do takes 1% of the energy of doing things that you weren't born to do. And for me, writing columns and writing poems take no energy whatsoever. If I'm working with a client who has written a non-fiction book, I find it pretty easy, because I can just sort of feel if it's right. But when I'm working with a client who's written some sort of a story, I can still do it. I still have enough skill and ability to be able to see what works and what doesn't, and see if their plot's working and their characterization and that sort of thing. But it takes a lot more effort. So for me, it's non-fiction all the way.
And what do you think of the notion that there is research to show that external pressures, for example, having to meet deadlines or having to please the employer, undermines the creative kind of essence that people like yourself have? Have you found that in your work?
I think there's nothing like a deadline to force you to do it. I think everybody's different. I think some people are terrible procrastinators, and it's only a deadline that will make them do it. And there are other people who are not terrible procrastinators and write for the love of it. I think the people who write for the love of it will probably not like being commissioned. I know a lot of artists don't like really being commissioned to do something in particular. They would rather be told, do anything you like. So I think some people are very confined by that. I don't mind being either way, because I have only suffered from writer's block once, and I never, apart from this one time in my life, and that was because I'd had some very bad feedback from just a friend, and it wasn't necessarily justified, but that feedback threw me off course for a year. But apart from that, I've never had writer's block. I can always write something, whether I've got a deadline or not. But it's easy for life to get in the way. But I think that I have one huge advantage over many other people. I don't care if my house is a mess. I don't care if I haven't done the washing up. For me, I wash up at the end of the day when I've finished work. I don't do it the rest of the time. And some people cannot sit down until their office is tidy, their desk is tidy, the washing's done, the washing up's done, the evening meal's prepared, and anything else. That's not me. I would much rather be sitting at my desk writing than I would doing anything domestic.
Yeah, that seems to be, you know, a distinguishing character of artistic people, that the chaos is almost inspirational, isn't it? The chaos around us.
I don't even notice it. If you could see my desk now, it's dreadful. I don't care. I can work around it.
Yes. Yeah, that very, very rarely do you see an artist studio that is, you know, spotless and clean. The messier it is, the more productive the artist is being, usually. So Joe, in terms of you, when you work with writers, how can you tell whether they have expressed creativity in their work, or whether they've just put words together that, you know, are not original, they're not going to add much value to anyone reading it?
I think for me, it's an instinctive thing. I can just feel and sense whether their writing feels natural or not, and I can sense the flow of it. Also, I believe that your natural writing voice is usually your speaking voice. And okay, you probably have to edit it afterwards because we say and ah and we go around in circles when we're speaking. But I think in general, if you can manage to let yourself go enough, lose control enough to allow yourself to write as you speak, then I think that that will be your writer's voice with some tidying up. And it's the people who try too hard that perhaps don't get there. But it does depend what you're doing, because there is lots of value in editing and editing and editing and editing to make something better and better and better. But I do think it depends on what it is you're writing. I think if you're writing a memoir, or you're writing fiction, you're writing something that has a story that needs to leap off the page and enter the imagination of the reader, it is your duty as a writer to polish and polish and polish and polish and find exactly the right word to evoke what it is you want to evoke. But I think if you're writing non-fiction, and you're not really, of course, there are stories within non-fiction, and those stories and anecdotes, I think, yes, you do need to craft them. But I think that the more bold, do this now, do this type writing, I don't know that you do necessarily have to work and work and work at it. So I think it's horses for courses, as they say.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in doing academic research, very often people will spend years and years and years. You know, I spent 6 years refining my work, because the first 3 years was just uncovering what already existed. And I think that's an important part of creativity in nonfiction, is that sometimes it takes a very long time to know what the existing literature is already saying, and then to try and add to it.
Yes, I think you do need to do that, and that's an interesting point you raise, because I have a client at the moment who I asked people to fill in a form beforehand, and I said, what other books are out there like yours? And he said, none. And that's the wrong answer, because there are always lots and lots of books like yours out there. There have to be, and they won't be exactly the same, of course, but you have to have read them so that you know what works and what doesn't and what you like. And you also, so you can emulate perhaps the flow of a chapter, or bits and pieces from other books. You have to have done the research in order to write something else. People think that they'll be too influenced by other books. They won't. They will be educated by them.
That's right. Yeah, because creativity doesn't occur in a vacuum, even though we might not be consciously aware of our influences are, we have been influenced.
Yeah. I believe that writers need to read, and writers need to write. Well, first thing I'd like to say is, if anybody goes to my website, summertimepublishing.com, they can download a little booklet called So You Want to Write a Book, and it's 10 tips about writing, which is just lots of information condensed down to very little, which should be quite useful. I believe that everybody has a book in them. I don't believe that everybody can write. I think the majority of people can write. The majority of people are able to be led towards writing and can be edited. I think that I have helped, I don't know how many people I've actually worked with one-on-one since I've been doing this. I've been doing authors mentoring for 16 years. And I have helped 150 people, I think, to actually get published. And I think in all those years, I think I have had 3 people who I really thought were never going to be able to write. But everybody else can either be encouraged to write, or they can be edited into a good format. But there are a handful of people, so it's not very many. So let's say it's maybe 3% of the population who I think actually don't really have it in them. But I do think we all have a book, and it just might mean somebody else might have to write it for you.